My sister forced her way into the lab I created using a $1.5 million federal grant, turned it into her fantasy wedding venue, and laughed off every warning until 300,000 people watched the whole thing fall apart. You know that special kind of cold, sick dread that washes over you when you realize your own family has not only committed multiple federal crimes, but they've done it inside your highly sensitive lab. Poisoning 150 guests with hallucinogenic fungi? Yeah, that happened to me. And the absolute worst part? I was the one who had to call the feds on them, triggering a disaster that left my family utterly, irrevocably ruined. My name is Veronica Coleman, I'm 35, and I have a PhD in botany, specializing in mycology. Fungi, you know? Not exactly dinner table conversation, but it's my passion. I've always prided myself on being methodical, precise, and fiercely independent. Right now, I'm tackling the most critical project of my entire career, research into plastic-degrading fungi. We're talking about a nearly $1.5 million grant from the USDA, a project that could quite literally revolutionize environmental cleanup. Getting this off the ground was a battle, I swear. I had to register my operation as an LLC, then fight tooth and nail with the city council for 8 months just to get the zoning permits approved. Pure bureaucratic warfare, but I won. What made it all possible? An old farm I inherited from my grandparents. It's tucked away in a secluded suburban area, the kind of place where neighbors mind their own business and regulations are a bit more flexible. I poured a huge chunk of that grant money into renovating the original greenhouse. And I mean renovating. It's now an extraordinary biosafety level 2 laboratory, meeting every single federal standard. From the outside, it looks stunning, like a classic Victorian-style conservatory, all graceful curves and gleaming glass arranged in a beautiful cruciform design. I wanted my workspace to inspire me every single day. But inside? That's where the serious science happens. Quiet negative pressure ventilation systems hum, maintaining perfect air circulation. Humidity sensors monitor conditions down to the decimal point. Temperature controls keep everything stable within 0.5 degree Fahrenheit. And throughout that space, thousands of neurospore samples rest, dormant, waiting for the precise conditions that will wake them up and, hopefully, change the world. Legally, the land is mine. But the contents inside? Every single spore, every piece of equipment, every data point, that's federal property. The USDA doesn't mess around with their investments, and neither do I. Usually, I have an assistant, Amy. She's sharp, reliable, handles data entry and basic monitoring. She knows enough to spot problems. But Amy takes weekends off. So Saturdays and Sundays, it's just me and the automated systems. My family, bless their hearts, has never really understood what I do. My parents, Robert and Linda, are retired civil servants. Their careers were basically pushing papers and counting down to pension. My sister, Tiffany, she's 29 and fancies herself a social media influencer, though her follower count isn't exactly screaming viral sensation. To them, my work has always been growing ornamental plants or playing in the dirt. They've never once bothered to learn the difference between a greenhouse and a federal research facility. About 5 months ago, our family dynamics took a turn that, looking back, should have been a screaming red flag. My mother cornered me during Sunday dinner with what she clearly thought was a stroke of genius. "Veronica, honey," she began, in that sweet voice that always precedes trouble. "Tiffany and I have been talking about her wedding venue. That conservatory of yours. I just kept eating my pot roast, silently praying this conversation would stay theoretical. It looks so natural, so upper-class trendy. All that glass and those beautiful iron frames. It would be perfect for a wedding. Very Instagram-worthy." My fork literally froze halfway to my mouth. "Mom, absolutely not." "But sweetie." No, I put my utensils down, looked straight at her. "What I have out there is not a party venue. It's a federal research facility with active biological materials. There are biohazards. There are contamination protocols. There are laws." My father, Robert, leaned forward, that patronizing expression he'd perfected over decades in municipal administration plastered on his face. "Now, Veronica, Don't you think you're being a little dramatic? It's just plants. It's not just plants, Dad, I shot back. These are genetically modified organisms that could pose serious health risks if mishandled. The space is under federal jurisdiction. I could lose my career, my funding, everything. Tiffany, who'd been glued to her phone this whole time, finally looked up. Come on, Ronnie. It's my wedding. Family should come first. Family doesn't ask family to commit federal crimes, I said, the words hanging in the air. The table fell silent. I explained the biological hazards in terms even they could grasp. I talked about the negative pressure systems, the contamination risks, the federal oversight. I watched their faces carefully, searching for any sign that they understood the seriousness of what they were asking. When they nodded and changed the subject, I assumed they understood. I thought they respected my profession enough to accept my refusal. I was catastrophically wrong. My fatal weakness has always been this stupid, persistent need for family validation. Despite their dismissiveness, despite their complete inability to understand my work, I still craved their approval. I wanted them to be proud of me, to see that I wasn't just their weird daughter playing with dirt. I was a scientist making a real difference. That weakness made me utterly blind to what came next. According to the schedule they'd given me, Tiffany's wedding was still 3 weeks away. They'd been planning for months, showing me venue photos, asking for my input on flowers, treating me like I'd naturally be a part of the celebration. I'd even started thinking about what dress to wear as her bridesmaid. The devastating reality? The wedding was actually scheduled for 2 weeks from now. They had lied about the date from the very beginning, ensuring I wouldn't be present at my own sister's wedding. But more than that, they had lied to create an opportunity. The week before the actual wedding, which I still believed was 3 weeks out, my parents showed up at my lab with what seemed like a peace offering. Surprise, my mother announced, waving an envelope like a magic wand. We got you something special. Inside was a 3-day, 2-night vacation package to something called the Mountain Vista Eco Lodge Retreat, tucked away in the mountains about 3 hours north. We want you to truly rest, my father said, his voice warm with what seemed like genuine concern. Let your spirit be completely at ease. We need you in your best state to be Tiffany's bridesmaid. My mother nodded enthusiastically. I found this place while I was looking for honeymoon spots for Tiffany. The reviews are incredible. Digital detox, nature walks, meditation sessions. You work so hard, honey. You deserve this. I looked at the brochure. The lodge did look peaceful, natural wood and stone, surrounded by pine trees, promises of organic meals, and sunrise yoga. The timing seemed reasonable. My project was in its incubation phase. Most of the work was automated. The system monitored itself, sending updates to my phone app. Everything had battery backup and a generator for emergencies. Plus, I was under pressure from the USDA sponsors for a comprehensive progress report. Taking 3 days to decompress before tackling that massive document actually sounded like responsible self-care. You really think I should go? I asked. Absolutely, my mother chirped. Consider it our gift. We want our bridesmaid looking radiant and relaxed. The more I thought about it, the more sense it made. 3 days away wouldn't hurt anything. The automated systems could handle themselves for a long weekend. Amy would be back Monday morning if anything went wrong. And, honestly, I had been feeling the pressure lately. A little mountain air might be exactly what I needed. I left at noon on Friday, my car loaded with hiking boots and the novel I'd been meaning to read for months. Amy left work at her usual 5 p.m., locking up the lab and activating the weekend security protocols. As I drove toward the mountains, windows down and music playing, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, genuine relaxation. For the next 72 hours, I would have no responsibilities except to myself. I had absolutely no idea that for the next 72 hours, my conservatory would be turned into hell. At 6 p.m. on Friday, exactly 1 hour after Amy left for the weekend, my parents set their plan in motion with the chilling precision of career bureaucrats who understood how to manipulate systems. They'd found exactly the right kind of locksmith for their purposes, the type who operates out of a van, takes cash payments, and doesn't ask too many questions about proper licensing or verification procedures. When he arrived at my front gate, He found what appeared to be a straightforward family emergency. My father, Robert, positioned himself next to the locked entrance while my mother, Linda, held her phone at the perfect angle for a video call. The locksmith watched as a young woman appeared on the screen, my sister, Tiffany, playing the role of her life. "Hi, sorry about this," Tiffany said to the locksmith through the phone, her voice pitched with just the right note of embarrassment and urgency. "I'm the homeowner, but I'm stuck out of town on a business trip for the next 10 days. These are my parents, and they're trying to get inside to feed my parrot before the poor thing starves." She held up what appeared to be a driver's license to the camera, though the locksmith was too far away to read the details. "I can give you my address, my full name, whatever you need to verify. I just really need someone to cut that lock so they can get inside." The locksmith looked at my parents, who radiated exactly the kind of concerned, middle-class respectability that screams reliability. My father wore his favorite golf polo, the one that made him look like someone who definitely owned property and cared about parrots. My mother clutched her purse with both hands and kept making worried noises about the poor little bird. And to make this right, my father added, reaching for his wallet, "We'd like to pay you to install a brand new lock when you're done, something better than this old thing. My daughter deserves proper security." The locksmith bought every word. Why wouldn't he? They were offering to pay him twice, once to cut the lock, once to install a replacement. They had the homeowner on video giving explicit permission. They looked exactly like the kind of people who would drive across town to save a pet. Within 20 minutes, my front gate swung open. But the real violation was just beginning. Once inside my property, they walked straight toward the conservatory. And that's when they encountered what should have stopped them cold: bright yellow warning signs posted at every single entrance. Warning: Federal Research Site. Biohazard. Authorized personnel only. Protective equipment required. Instead of fear, instead of recognition of what those signs meant, I later learned that my mother looked at them and scoffed. "Robert, look at this nonsense," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "That girl always over-dramatizes everything. Take these down for me, will you? They look absolutely hideous. How are we supposed to take proper wedding photos with these eyesores everywhere?" This was the moment that transformed their plan from simple trespassing into something far more serious: the willful sabotage of federal safety warnings. But in their minds, they were just clearing away their dramatic daughter's unnecessary decorations. My father systematically removed every single warning sign and stacked them behind the tool shed where they wouldn't spoil the aesthetic. Then, together, they located the main electrical panel and shut off the security camera system. "There," my mother said, dusting off her hands. "Now we can work in peace." The next call was to Tiffany, and I can only imagine the triumph in her voice when she answered. "We captured the garden house," my father announced. Tiffany immediately contacted her event planning company, the same agency she'd been stringing along for weeks, telling them the venue was almost confirmed and just waiting for final family approval. Within minutes, she had crews scheduled to arrive Saturday morning for setup. Meanwhile, 3 hours north in the mountains, I was settling into my eco-lodge experience with absolutely no awareness of the disaster unfolding at home. The lodge was everything the brochure promised: rustic but comfortable, with a dining room that served organic everything and a schedule of activities designed to disconnect guests from their usual stress. I attended the evening meditation session, ate dinner by candlelight, and retired early with genuine contentment. Before bed, I decided to check my work systems one last time. Using the lodge's Wi-Fi, I opened the monitoring app on my phone. The camera system showed signal loss, but that wasn't unusual. The wireless cameras sometimes had connection issues, especially during weather changes. More importantly, all the biological indicators looked perfect. Temperature, stable. Humidity, optimal range. Air pressure, normal. CO2 levels, well within parameters. I reassured myself, must just be a camera system glitch. Everything else is running perfectly. I went to sleep with complete peace of mind, believing my conservatory was secure and operating exactly as designed. I had no way of knowing that those normal readings were about to be shattered by human interference. Saturday morning brought the invasion in earnest. The event crew arrived at 8 a.m. sharp, 3 trucks, full of professionals who specialized in transforming spaces into wedding venues. When they first saw my conservatory, they were genuinely impressed. "This is incredible," the lead coordinator told my parents. "Victorian architecture, all this natural light, those gorgeous iron frames. Your daughter has exquisite taste." My mother beamed as if she'd designed the space herself. We knew it would be perfect for our Tiffany's special day. The crew got to work with the efficiency of people who'd done this hundreds of times, but their expertise was in event planning, not biosafety protocols. They had no idea they were setting up a party inside an active research facility containing genetically modified organisms. The cruciform design of my conservatory made their job almost too easy. The intersection of the cross, which I had specifically designed as the main ventilation area where air circulation was strongest, became the obvious choice for the central stage. They installed the DJ booth and dance floor right where the negative pressure systems worked hardest to maintain safe air quality. My high-powered photosynthesis lamps, designed to provide specific light wavelengths for fungal cultivation, were repurposed as fantastic stage lighting, according to my mother's enthusiastic direction. The south wing, where I stored tools and prepared soil samples, was transformed into an elaborate buffet and bar area. Tables appeared, linens were draped, and bartenders began setting up stations for what would obviously be serious drinking. The north wing, where I grew dense climbing vines as part of my research into plant-fungal symbiosis, became the altar. The event crew attached fake white flowers to my living specimens, creating what they clearly thought was a romantic, natural setting for the ring exchange ceremony. By 10 a.m. Sunday morning, the transformation was complete. My scientific sanctuary had become a wedding venue that would have graced the cover of any bridal magazine. Tiffany had arranged for 10 different camera angles to live stream the entire event. This wasn't just about celebrating her marriage, it was about monetizing it. She expected to earn serious advertising revenue from what she promoted as the most unique wedding venue you've ever seen. Everything looked absolutely perfect. None of them had any idea that they had just created the perfect conditions for biological disaster. At 11 a.m. Sunday morning, Tiffany's wedding officially began. The guest list read like a who's who of our district's elite: law partners who handled million-dollar cases, investors with portfolios that could fund small cities, and most importantly, the groom's CEO, a man whose approval could make or break careers. 150 people filled my conservatory, not counting the service staff, event managers, and photography crews. These weren't just any guests. These were exactly the kind of high-profile individuals whose presence could launch Tiffany's influencer career into the stratosphere. Her live stream was already performing beyond her wildest dreams. Over 300,000 concurrent viewers had tuned in to watch what she'd been promoting all week as the wedding of the century in the most exclusive secret venue. The irony was devastating. The more successful the event appeared, the more catastrophic the consequences would be. Beneath that glamorous facade, disaster was already beginning. The fungi I was researching weren't inherently dangerous under normal circumstances. They were specifically chosen for their plastic-degrading properties, their stability, and their generally benign nature. But my monitoring systems had been carefully calibrated to detect one critical danger: under anaerobic conditions, or when CO2 concentrations exceeded specific thresholds. These organisms produced a mild hallucinogen as part of their natural stress response. It was a defense mechanism millions of years in the making. When the fungi felt threatened, they released chemical compounds designed to disorient potential threats until conditions improved. The wedding guests had created the perfect storm. When the DJ started playing music with heavy bass lines, the sound waves reverberated through the glass structure. When 150 people began breathing together in the sealed environment, CO2 levels started climbing rapidly. When they transformed my carefully ventilated space into a dance floor, they inadvertently disabled the air filtration system by blocking crucial vents with their staging. The result was a sealed room where fungal spores became trapped and concentrated, while carbon dioxide built to dangerous levels. The organisms I'd spent months cultivating suddenly found themselves in exactly the conditions that triggered their most primitive survival instincts. The spore burst began invisibly, silently, with the lethal efficiency of millions of years of evolution. Stage 1 was euphoria. Initially, the guests felt what they interpreted as wedding joy amplified. The music seemed richer, more intense. Colors appeared more vibrant. Everyone's mood elevated beyond normal celebration levels. Tiffany, radiant in her Vera Wang dress, danced with abandon in front of the main livestream camera. Her cheeks flushed with what viewers assumed was bridal bliss as she shouted into the lens, "This is going to be the most special wedding you've ever seen." The atmosphere in here is absolutely amazing. The online audience responded with thousands of heart emojis and congratulatory messages. Comments poured in praising the venue, the dress, the obvious happiness of everyone involved. For 30 beautiful, terrifying minutes, it looked like Tiffany had achieved everything she'd ever dreamed of. Then, stage 2 hit, irritation. The transition was as swift as it was horrifying. Joy curdled into something else entirely, as every guest began experiencing the sensation of thousands of ants crawling under their skin. The itching started subtly, a scratch here, a rub there, but escalated with frightening speed. Guests in designer suits and elegant gowns began clawing at their arms, their necks, their faces. Hairstyles that had taken hours to perfect became disheveled as people frantically scratched their scalps. Makeup streaked and smeared as the need to scratch overwhelmed all social niceties. The live stream audience watched in growing confusion as the celebration transformed into something that looked increasingly disturbing. Comments shifted from congratulations to concerned questions. Is everyone okay? Why is the bride scratching like that? Something seems wrong. But the worst was yet to come. Stage 3 brought mass hallucination and complete chaos. When the spore concentration peaked, reality dissolved for every person inside my conservatory. The mild hallucinogen became a full-scale psychedelic nightmare, customized by each person's deepest fears and anxieties. At the VIP area, the groom's CEO, a man known for his composure and authority, was lying flat on his back in the grass, making swimming motions with his arms. In his altered state, he believed he was floating in a warm California ocean, enjoying the most relaxing vacation of his life. He called out to nearby guests about the beautiful dolphins and perfect waves. At the altar, Tiffany's dream wedding became a horror show. The bridal bouquet in her hands transformed, in her perception, into a grinning skull that whispered her name. Her magnificent Vera Wang dress, the one she'd saved for 2 years to afford, writhed around her body like a living thing. She screamed in terror, convinced that an enormous albino python was constricting her chest, cutting off her breathing. In front of 300,000 live stream viewers, she began tearing the dress off her body, shredding thousands of dollars worth of silk and lace while screaming about snakes that existed only in her mind. Throughout the conservatory, other guests battled their own demons. Some saw the walls melting like wax. Others believed they were being chased by invisible predators. A group near the buffet table became convinced that the food was moving, that the elegant canapes were actually insects waiting to crawl into their mouths. The panic was universal and absolute. They rushed toward the exits, but my conservatories. 3-layer tempered glass, installed for security and climate control, proved impossible to break with bare hands. They were trapped in what had become a transparent prison, a fishbowl filled with toxic spores, panicking like animals caught in a cage. The live stream audience watched in horror as 150 people descended into coordinated madness. Emergency services calls began flooding local dispatch as viewers realized they were witnessing a genuine disaster, not some elaborate wedding stunt. The beautiful Victorian conservatory, my pride and joy, had become a glass tomb filled with screaming, hallucinating wedding guests who couldn't escape the poison they'd unknowingly unleashed. And somewhere in the mountains, completely unaware, I was about to receive the phone call that would destroy everything I'd ever worked for. At exactly 12 p.m., just as the chaos inside my conservatory reached its horrifying peak, I finished my final activity at the Mountain Vista Eco Lodge and began my descent down the winding mountain road. For 3 days, I'd been living in blissful ignorance, hiking nature trails, practicing meditation, and reading my novel by the fireplace. The digital detox had worked exactly as advertised. I felt refreshed, centered, and ready to tackle that progress report for the USDA. As my car reached lower elevation and cell towers came back into range, my phone exploded back to life with the fury of suppressed notifications. The first thing I heard was the relentless chiming of emergency alerts from the Garden app. Red warnings cascaded down my screen like digital blood: critical temperature spike, CO2 levels extreme, pressure system failure, contamination alert. But it was the missed calls that made my hands shake. 47 calls from Amy, 16 voicemails, text messages that grew increasingly frantic as the timestamps progressed. I pulled over at a scenic overlook, my heart hammering as I played Amy's messages in chronological order. "Hey Veronica, it's Amy. I know it's Sunday morning, but something's weird with the Garden app. Can you call me back?" That was 9:30 a.m., her voice calm but concerned. "Veronica, please pick up. The readings are going crazy. Temperature's spiking. CO2 is through the roof. I'm driving over there right now." 10:15 a.m., panic creeping in. "Oh my God, Veronica. There are cars everywhere. There's a party happening at your lab. A wedding. I can see people through the glass and the readings are..." 10:45 a.m., her voice breaking. "You need to see this live stream. Your sister's wedding is happening inside your lab and they're acting insane. Please watch the stream and call me back immediately." 11:30 a.m., barely coherent. With trembling fingers, I opened social media and searched for Tiffany's account. What I found was a hellscape broadcasting live from the place I'd dedicated my career to protecting. The video showed my beautiful conservatory transformed into a scene from a nightmare. Elegant wedding guests writhed on the floor, scratching at their skin like animals. My sister, still in her destroyed wedding dress, sat rocking in a corner, tears streaming down her face as she stared at something only she could see. The groom's CEO continued his imaginary swimming, occasionally calling out about sea creatures that didn't exist. Local police cars surrounded the exterior of my property. Officers stood at a safe distance, clearly recognizing that they were dealing with something beyond their expertise. They had no protective equipment, no understanding of what they were facing. If they rushed inside to help, they would only become additional victims. The live stream comments section was pure chaos. Viewers demanded explanations, speculated about gas leaks or terrorist attacks, and repeatedly called for emergency services. Someone had pinned my sister's location, and people were sharing the address with increasingly urgent warnings about a mass poisoning event. In that moment, watching the disaster unfold through a phone screen, the pain of betrayal gave way to something far more important: the responsibility I carried as a scientist. I understood the danger level better than anyone on Earth. Those spores, in the concentrations my readings suggested, could affect anyone who entered without proper protection. The local police were brave but completely unprepared. Emergency medical teams would be walking into a contamination zone. If this spread beyond the conservatory, if people carried spores home on their clothes or in their respiratory systems, we could be looking at a community-wide health crisis. More than that, I was legally responsible for every organism in that facility. The USDA grant made me the designated steward of federal property. Every spore, every piece of equipment, every data point, it was all my responsibility under federal law. I had two choices: let this disaster escalate while I preserved my career and family relationships, or do what my training and conscience demanded. With hands that felt steady for the first time all day, I dialed the emergency number I'd memorized during my initial USDA training, but never expected to use. USDA Emergency Response. This is Dr. Martinez. This is Dr. Veronica Coleman, Project ID UMAR 4471V. I need to report a dangerous level biorelease at my authorized facility. Hold please, Dr. Coleman. I'm transferring you to the CDC Emergency Response Team. The next voice was crisp, professional, and terrifyingly efficient. "Dr. Coleman, This is Agent Mary Smith with the CDC. We need your location, the nature of the organisms involved, and an immediate assessment of contamination scope. I gave them everything: the project identification codes, the specific fungal strains, the estimated spore concentration based on my app readings, the number of people exposed, and the live stream link so they could assess the situation in real time. Dr. Coleman, based on what you're telling us, we're implementing Level 3 containment protocols. Federal response teams are already en route to your location. Do not, under any circumstances, attempt to enter the contaminated area yourself. I understand. We'll also need you to report to the Field Command Center for immediate debriefing. Your cooperation in this matter will be noted in our investigation. As I hung up the phone, I understood that this call was both an act of conscience and a death sentence. I had saved lives. The lives of the police officers who would have rushed in unprepared, the lives of my family members who were slowly poisoning themselves, and potentially the lives of everyone in my community. But I had also just triggered the most comprehensive federal investigation my field had ever seen. My career was over. My family's freedom was in jeopardy. And everything I'd worked for my entire adult life was about to be destroyed. The mountain air that had seemed so clean and refreshing just hours ago now felt thin and insufficient. As I started my car and began the drive toward the disaster I'd unknowingly left behind, I realized that my old life, the life of Dr. Veronica Coleman, respected scientist and loyal daughter, was already over. What waited for me at the bottom of this mountain was something else entirely. The sirens were just the beginning. I stood behind the police barricade they'd set up at the edge of my property. My property. The one I'd worked a decade to afford. The wedding guests, who'd been dancing and hallucinating an hour ago, were now corralled on the front lawn like confused cattle, wrapped in emergency blankets, some still twitching from the after effects of the neurospores. Nobody was allowed to leave. The police had made that crystal clear the moment the feds arrived. "Ma'am, you're going to need to come with us," a detective said, appearing at my elbow. His badge read Morrison. He looked tired, like this was already the weirdest case of his career, and it was only Sunday afternoon. "I haven't been on the property in 2 days," I said flatly. "Check the security footage." "We will. But you're still coming with us." The sound of helicopters cut through the air before I could argue. I looked up to see not one, not two, but 3 black choppers descending toward my conservatory, like something out of an apocalypse movie. Behind them, a convoy of black SUVs rolled up my driveway, each one bearing the unmistakable federal seal, CDC, USDA, and, unless I was mistaken, that last one was Homeland Security. My mother's face, visible through the crowd of blanket-wrapped guests, had gone the color of old oatmeal, but her composure was still, well, it was still there. "Your family is claiming they didn't know about the biological hazards," Morrison said. I laughed. It came out harsh and bitter. "Detective, I have 12 years of text messages from my mother complaining about my weird mushroom house. I have emails where I explicitly warned them never to enter without proper equipment. I have a family dinner recording from last Christmas where my father called my research playing with moldy dirt. They knew. They just didn't care." He nodded slowly. "The fungal spores that were released, your assistant says they're not dangerous to the ecosystem?" "They're not. The neuroreactive compounds break down in open air within hours, but in an enclosed space with elevated CO2 and bass vibrations." I shook my head. "It's like setting off a hallucinogenic bomb. Temporary, but intense. The guests will be fine in a day or 2. Physically, at least." I paused. The emotional damage? I thought about the live stream. About the CEO of a Fortune 500 company crawling on the grass, pretending to swim. About my sister ripping her Vera Wang dress to shreds while screaming about invisible spiders. About 146 people, relatives, business executives, socialites, reduced to viral memes, watched by 300,000 people. That, I said, is going to last a lot longer. They released me just after midnight. No charges. My mother, father, and Tiffany weren't so lucky. The federal government came down on them like the wrath of every regulation they'd ignored. I wasn't there for the official proceedings, but Amy sent me the court documents as they became public record. United States Department of Agriculture versus Coleman Family Estate. Count 1. Destruction of federal research property. The warning signs they'd removed? Each one was federal property. Each one bore a government seal. Removing them wasn't just trespassing. It was tampering with a federal research site. Count 2. Causing risk of biological release. Even though the spores weren't dangerous to the environment, the potential for contamination triggered a mandatory federal response. Ignorance, the judge ruled, was not an excuse when the warnings had been clearly posted. The restitution demands arrived first. Grant restitution, $1,500,000. The entire project was contaminated, and the government wanted every penny back, plus damages. Environmental cleanup and hazardous waste disposal, $250,000. They'd brought in a 30-person hazmat team, destroyed every piece of furniture, excavated the contaminated soil, and sterilized the entire structure. Federal fine under the Plant Protection Act, $500,000. Maximum penalty for willful removal of biosafety signage. Total government liability, $2,250,000. My parents' homeowner insurance? Denied. Every cent of coverage. Rejected with a single, brutal sentence. This policy does not cover intentional criminal acts or violations of federal biosafety regulations. My father actually called me after he got that letter. I let it go to voicemail. I deleted it without listening. Then came the guests. 150 people, united in their fury and humiliation. They hired a law firm that specialized in class action suits, and that firm smelled blood in the water. The lawsuit landed like a guillotine. Medical costs. Every single guest had been rushed to the ER. Ambulances. Emergency antidotes. Toxicology screenings. Psychiatric evaluations for the hallucinations. The bills averaged $2,500 per person. 146 guests times $2,500 equals $365,000. Personal property damage. The hazmat team hadn't just sterilized the conservatory, they destroyed everything inside. Vera Wang wedding dresses dissolved in chemical spray. Armani suits incinerated as contaminated material. Dior handbags, Rolex watches, custom Italian shoes. All gone. The lawyers assigned an average value of $10,000 per guest in destroyed property. 146 guests times $10,000 equals $1,460,000. Emotional distress and public humiliation. This was the big one. The live stream had gone nuclear. Within 24 hours, it had been viewed over 3 million times. Memes flooded social media. The CEO swimming on grass. My sister's dress-ripping meltdown. A state senator crying about demons in the roses. These weren't just embarrassed wedding guests, they were public figures, business leaders, socialites whose reputations were currency. The emotional distress claims ranged from $50,000 to $100,000 per person, depending on their public profile and the severity of their viral humiliation. Estimated total, $10 million. I read the lawsuit documents in my hotel room. I'd checked into a Holiday Inn 40 miles away, unable to stomach being near the property. And I felt something cold and satisfied settle in my chest. They'd wanted a lavish wedding. They'd gotten a national scandal. The final tally came 3 weeks later, when all the legal proceedings had been consolidated into a single judgment. Total liability, $14,075,000. Yes, $14,047,500. My parents didn't have that kind of money. Nobody in our family did. The law firm where Tiffany's new husband worked? They fired him within 48 hours, cutting ties before the scandal could contaminate their reputation. His career, built on family connections and Ivy League credentials, evaporated overnight. My parents were forced to sell the house, the 4-bedroom colonial they'd lived in for 30 years, the one my mother had decorated with such pride. The bank seized it for a fraction of its value. Even that wasn't enough to cover the debts. They declared bankruptcy. But bankruptcy doesn't erase restitution to the federal government. That debt follows you forever, garnishing wages, seizing tax returns, haunting every financial decision until death. My sister and her husband divorced 6 weeks after the wedding. The marriage lasted less than 2 months. She'd wanted a fairy tale. She got a financial nightmare and a humiliation that would follow her for life. Her influencer career, built on lifestyle envy and aspirational content, was finished. Nobody wanted to follow someone whose wedding was synonymous with public disaster. I should have felt triumphant. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt hollow. The bank officer was efficient and impersonal as he pressed the bright orange foreclosure seal onto the front door of my parents' house. It made a satisfying thunk as the adhesive caught, officially marking the end of 30 years of Coleman family history. I stood at the curb, engine running, watching through my car windshield. I hadn't planned to come. I'd told myself I was done, that I'd moved on, that watching their house being seized was beneath me. But some curiosity had pulled me here, or maybe it was the need for closure. One last look at the place where I'd grown up feeling like a disappointing footnote in someone else's story. My mother had planted roses along the front walkway. They were blooming now, pink and white, oblivious to the drama unfolding around them. She'd always cared more about appearances than substance. The roses looked beautiful. The family inside had been rotten. The bank officer climbed into his sedan and drove away. The house stood empty now, windows dark, the cheerful yellow paint job my mother had insisted on last summer now looking garish and false. Like everything else about the Coleman family image, pretty on the surface, hollow underneath. My phone buzzed. Another message from Amy. The university confirmed your start date. August 15th. Congrats, Professor Coleman. Professor. Not principal investigator. Not lead researcher on a $1.5 million federal grant. Just professor. A lecturer position at a state university 3 states away, teaching undergraduate botany to students who probably thought fungi were just the fuzzy things in their dorm room fridges. I'd lost everything, really. The conservatory, my dream, my passion project, the culmination of a decade of work, was sealed by federal order. My professional reputation had taken a hit too. Not officially. The investigation had cleared me of wrongdoing, but whispers followed me anyway. That's the researcher whose family destroyed the federal grant project. She didn't secure her facility properly. Family drama contaminated millions in research. It didn't matter that I'd been the victim. In academia, scandal is scandal. I'd been soft. That was my crime. I'd known my family was selfish, manipulative, appearance-obsessed. I'd known they resented my success, that they saw my work as weird and my achievements as somehow embarrassing compared to Tiffany's Instagram-perfect life. But I'd never suspected they'd do this. I'd never imagined they'd break into a research facility, remove biohazard warnings, and host a wedding reception in a BSL-2 lab just to avoid paying venue rental fees. That failure of imagination had cost me everything. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a news alert. Viral wedding disaster results in record lawsuit settlement. I didn't click on it. I'd lived it. I didn't need to read about it. My family had lost everything because of greed. Because they'd valued appearances over integrity, convenience over responsibility, social status over basic human decency. They'd looked at my life's work and seen nothing but a free venue and an inconvenient obstacle to their perfect wedding fantasy. I'd lost the grant. I'd lost the conservatory. I'd lost years of research and a career trajectory that had once seemed so promising. But they'd lost more. They'd lost their home, their savings, their reputations, and their futures. They'd be paying off debt until they died. Tiffany's marriage had lasted shorter than most people's honeymoons. My father would never retire now. He'd be working until his body gave out, every paycheck garnished to pay restitution to the government and compensation to the guests he'd poisoned with ignorance and arrogance. My mother's perfect family image, the one she'd curated so carefully for decades, had been incinerated in the flames of a wedding reception gone catastrophically wrong. The highway stretched out before me, heading west toward my new life. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful if I'd had the energy to appreciate them. I'd packed everything I owned into this car and a small moving truck that was already on its way to my new apartment. I had no furniture. It had all been in the conservatory, destroyed by the hazmat team. I had my clothes, my books, my diplomas, and my laptop. Everything else was gone. Starting over meant starting with nothing. But nothing was better than being tied to people who would destroy everything you built just to save themselves a venue rental fee. I merged onto the interstate and accelerated, leaving behind the town where I'd grown up, the family who'd betrayed me, and the dream project that had consumed a decade of my life. Somewhere ahead was Prairie State University, a fresh start and the possibility, however small, that I might rebuild something worth keeping. I'd lost the grant, but my family had lost everything because of greed. And that, I realized, was the fair price of natural justice. Somehow, driving away from the wreckage of the life I'd built, I felt lighter than I had in years.